Hidden in the Heartland.
Hello, this is Kels Goodman, and this is our new Hidden in the Heartland podcast. Over the coming weeks and months, my friend Mark Burris and I will be starting up some discussions about the Heartland research. And we're also open to guests in the future. Our ultimate goal is to start up another season of Hidden in the Heartland. You know, you can watch all of the previous Heartland material on this YouTube channel for free. If you like what you see, please subscribe. We also invite you to help us financially by donating to our Give, Send, Go campaign, which is specifically for producing Season 3. And you can do that on the link below. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy this podcast. Well, welcome this morning. This is Kels Goodman, and I am here with Mark Burris back in New York. And I'm here in my new little studio. This is actually my wife's podcast studio, and she let me heartland it up a little bit. And so if you've ever seen her podcast, hers is called I'm No Therapist But, and it's a fun podcast about relationships and so she brings guests on. And so this is actually her room, but she's letting me use it. Bless her sweetheart. And so we are here, and I've got my cool logo here. So hopefully it'll, Mark was telling me earlier that it will hypnotize you. So you see, if you look at it long enough, you'll become a Heartlander. So that's kind of the goal that we have here on the Hidden in the Heartland podcast. But anyway, all joking aside, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to our day. And if you're only listening in by audio, I'm talking about this new little studio that I'm in and how much fun we're having with it. Today, we're going to talk about something really fun. It's a location is what I'm going to go into. And the location of which I'm going to be showing you is called Cahokia. Now, my resource that I'm pulling a lot of material from today is this DVD on the Cahokia Mounds, and I got this DVD at the Cahokia Mounds Museum, and I have like 3 of them, and it shows you every time we went, my wife Stephanie and I. We always said, oh, we better grab that DVD. I don't know if I have it. And then I looked on my shelf and I noticed I got 3 of them. So I'm not selling them by any means. I just figured there is such a good video. This is actually a really wonderful. You might be able to find this on YouTube. I'm not sure, because this video is actually produced about 15 years ago. And the company that did it is called Camera One in Seattle. And Camera One made all kinds of videos about all kinds of sites throughout North America. And so Camera One, I might even stick their URL here on the screen. But Camera One, if you look for them, camera1.us, they have all kinds of videos, and possibly they might all be on YouTube by now, as far as we know. But I haven't seen it yet on YouTube, but it might be. But this video really provided me with a lot of information when it comes to Cahokia, especially if you don't get the chance to go visit Cahokia. I do encourage you to find a way to take a road trip to Cahokia. Hey, Mark, have you ever been to Cahokia before? Have you ever made it down there?
I have not. Nope.
Okay.
I would love. That's on my bucket list, but I haven't been out there.
Yeah, but you've heard of Cahokia, right?
I've heard of it. Yep.
Yeah. So Cahokia, you'd be surprised how many people have never heard of Cahokia. And whenever Steph and I would road trip, and we would try to make our way when we go to Nauvoo, we'll go from Utah through Wyoming and Iowa, and then to Nauvoo and stay in Nauvoo, and then we'd get up the next day and we'd head on over to Cahokia and visit down there, which is not far from Nauvoo. I can't remember how many hours, but it's I don't even think it's a day's drive at all to get there. But it's a site right outside of St. Louis. It's actually on the Illinois side. And so there's a river that goes to, that divides between St. Louis and Cahokia. And so what I wanted to do is I wrote some notes that I wanted to kind of pass on to hopefully entertain you about Cahokia, because I sincerely believe that there is something, this is my personal just gut, that I feel, and I have no real hard evidence. In fact, some of the evidence is probably against me, and that's what I'm going to go into today. But somehow, some way, there's something important about Cahokia, and I can't put my finger on it. And it's mostly because of the size of Cahokia and how Cahokia is built up to being like a major hub in ancient American studies as far as sites and locations. So I kind of want to dive into that. So where is Cahokia? Cahokia is actually right. If you know where St. Louis is, there's the river, the Mississippi River, that goes past St. Louis, and on the other side is Cahokia, where it has been preserved, and so it's actually even been put on the United Nations preservation list, and so it gets a lot of attention and it gets some money, and so unlike many other ancient American sites, it actually has been fairly well preserved. A lot of ancient American sites have not been well preserved because personal people have just bought them up and they've torn them down and have not, given it the justice it's due to actually find out who was here. And this part of our answer in finding out who lived here long before Columbus is just not as well preserved as like Europe or even in Central and South America. And so that's part of the challenge that we suffer from when we try to do this research. That's why we have to refer to history. If we go to history, we can hear people's testimonies of what they saw before it got mowed down or plowed down or turned into a building or whatever. And so who was in Cahokia? We don't totally know, but these were some dates and times that I wanted to give. First thing, Cahokia is actually right in the center. It's right in the center of where a lot of rivers are. In fact, the Missouri River, the Mississippi River, and the Iowa River, I think it's the Iowa one. I just want to make sure. Yeah, the Illinois River. I'm sorry. The Illinois, Missouri, and Mississippi rivers all connect right here in Cahokia. And so it's obviously a hotbed. It's a floodplain is where Cahokia is. And so, and that's where so much commerce in the old days happened, was near a river. And it was very important if you had a city that you had it near a river. And not only was this a river, a place where there was, a lot of rivers, but it was like the place where all of these rivers joined. And when you see some maps of it, they kind of break it down in the video a little bit. They give you a nice visual as to all the rivers that connect right to Cahokia. They say that Cahokia started around, like they talk about the woodland culture. Okay. So the woodland culture started around 1000 BC. And they started appearing in Cahokia around 600 BC. So about 600 BC, the woodland culture people, according to the artifacts found, kind of started building up in the Cahokia area. But it wasn't for 1,000 years, supposedly, according to their dating, that Cahokia actually became a big, big place. In fact, they say that Cahokia got as large as about 20,000 people. And 20,000 people doesn't sound like a lot in today's numbers. But when you put the math to it, they say that the city of Philadelphia actually for a while became the biggest city in the United States. It wasn't until 1800 that Philadelphia actually hit 20,000 people.
Mm.
And so to kind of just give a comparison as to the size, 20,000 is a lot. But there's also not just the 20,000 that were in Cahokia, but there was all of the surrounding suburbs of Cahokia that have yet to, that some have been explored, but a lot have been destroyed. And one archaeologist talked about on the video, and I should have written his name, I apologize. He talked about how St. Louis is one of those places that we have no idea who lived in the St. Louis area, which would be on the other side of the river by Cahokia. So Cahokia is on the east side, but on the west side is St. Louis. And because they started building up St. Louis early on, we don't know who actually, what culture was in St. Louis, because before they could do any archaeology, and before archaeology even became an interesting piece of American history, people got right to it and started building a big city. And when that happens, the archaeology kind of goes out the window. And so that's part of why you a lot of American stuff you can't find
Yeah,
because
one of the things that's interesting about people is we like to live in the same places. We find we find the same thing attractive. Oh, look, there's a big river. Oh, look, we'll be able to do this. We'll be able to do that. So we end up building in the same place that ancient people did. And unfortunately, the ancient people in North America, they built out of pretty simple materials. So it wasn't super hard to dismantle what they had built and reuse it for something else. But
Yeah, that's a very good point. In fact, Camorra is a perfect example of that. And there's other cities that are the same. I mean, look at I was listening. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I was listening to Cleon Skousen set of recordings from 1973, where he teaches Old Testament and the Book of Mormon at BYU. And one of the comments that he made was during the the Tower of Babel. And when they build the Tower of Babel, it was Cleon Skousen's theory that the Lord confounded their language because they all just loved to converge, and they didn't. Everybody talks about the tower being built to heaven, but there's also that notion that we had a flood, he destroyed everybody, and then once people started repopulating again, they all came back to the same place. And sometimes when you have cities that get too big, it breeds trouble. It breeds socialism or crime, or people trying to use the people for their political gain or whatever. And people just love to seem to keep converging, and Cahokia is one of those places where there's probably people that continually came back and built that city up. And but yeah, I think it's amazing to see the background of Cahokia and how long it actually lasted. They say that the high point of Cahokia was around 900 AD, and that from about 900 AD till about 1200 is when it was like at its peak. And that's when enough people lived there. There's a plaza there. If you can visualize, I mean, it's important for you to maybe look up Cahokia and find out. You can see visually. There's the main mound, and that's I'll go into the sizing of everything. But they said that that went from 900 to 1200, and then around 1250, 1300, it started to decline, and there were many reasons for it. They don't really know the reasons. They suggested things like they used a lot of wood, and there was a lot of deforestation that started to happen because a lot of wood was being used. And also they were into corn, and because corn was the easiest thing to eat, it became one of those things that did not become very healthy after a while, if that's all you end up eating. And then there's also the possibility of there being a war, basically. Even though there's not a lot of evidence of war right in Cahokia, there was evidence of defenses of it being a city with a defense around it. And so the structures that are in Cahokia, there's about 80 mounds that they found in Cahokia. And the mounds are obviously a sign of that people, of the woodland people, also later known as the mound builders. But the mounds were definitely a sign of it. And let's see, I'm trying to go through my notes here. 80 mounds were left, but they estimate that there were many more. But because people had flattened the mounds for farming or for whatever they were doing throughout the 1800s, a lot was lost. There were many single-family dwellings. There was also a lot of little centers, public centers where people would go and do things, whether it be religiously or just socially. But the big place in Cahokia is called Monk's Mound. And Monk's Mound is like the main mound. And so when people see pictures of Cahokia, they see this pyramid-shaped thing that's just enormous, that rivals, the stuff you see in Central and South America. The only difference is it's built of earth. It's not made with brick or stone. And so that Monk's Mound is enormous. And I've climbed it several times, and you go to the top, and there's evidence that there was a structure on the top, and they kind of claimed it to be a temple, like some kind of temple on the top of that mound. And some of the other mounds were used for burials. So there's a lot of people buried. They found one mound, which is really interesting. Let's see if I can find my notes on that mound. But it's called Mound 72. And Mound 72 is a diagonal mound, which is kind of, all of the mounds were kind of in a, like they were all either facing one way or they were facing the other. And this one was kind of diagonal, so it was kind of odd from the rest of them. And in this mound, there were 270 burials. And one of the burial was a leader that rested on 20,000 shell beads. So obviously he was somebody that was important. And there was also a lot of copper and mica in the mound that was buried, along with about 800 arrowheads. And they did find 53 women and children all in one section. Some were beheaded. And so they theorized that there was a point in Cahokia where eventually they got to sacrificing. And so anyway, which is just hip and cool, I guess, when you live in Cahokia at the time, getting into the sacrificing. But that seems
Everybody
to be...
else was doing it around the world, so why not?
I know, right? Why not? Let's get into some sacrificing. And oh my goodness, these people, I'm telling you. But yeah, so that was one of the things they found. It was also fascinating to see that they called the place a temple town. And they say that, not only Cahokia, but there are many spots all around Cahokia. When you go, people who obviously use Cahokia as their, main city to go to the market or do whatever the commerce was. And then they go back to their city, wherever that was. And today the archaeologists call them temple towns, because there are all these other towns that also, were dotted all around the Ohio River Valley, and they were part of the Mississippian culture. Each town always consisted of several mounds that would be there, and some kind of worship center in each of these, what they call temple towns, and then maybe a few huts. Or at least leftovers of those huts, places where they lived. So obviously, while Cahokia was big, there were many other cities that were around it that served Cahokia. The other thing that they found in Cahokia, and it was an amazing image that they showed of early photography from the sky was they found that there was about a 2.5 mile long border around Cahokia, obviously for some kind of protection. And it was all, and they used lots of wood. They estimated like 30,000 logs were made to build this wall, this structure that supposedly protected. And there's just a little bit of it left, but they can see the ridges where the wall was all around Cahokia. So Cahokia, I'm going to say something blasphemous here, and that I know to a lot of Heartlanders, but yeah, look out. That's right. Plug your ears there, Mark. But I can't help, when I hear all of the elements of Cahokia, I can't help but to think of the name Zarahemla. I'm not saying it is by all means. In fact, they say that the dating is a little off. And so obviously dating wise, it wouldn't be, but I can't help but to think when you see all of these elements, a plaza out front and the main center with Monk's Mound being the center and all of the outlying cities and a big wall all around it, and it's right next to this river. And I mean, I know that it's a different side. I know that's I think if I remember right, Zarahemla has to be on a west side of the riverside, and from what I understand. And so I just can't help but to think something like Cahokia would be something like a Zarahemla when you think about it. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying that, and I'm not going to sit and alter all the data to go to my thought, my non-conclusion statement.
I think like you can look at descriptions of Book of Mormon cities, and they do talk about timber and wood being used as a material. So I mean, that's something that I keep going back to the skill set of the people that came. Nephi could work timber. They weren't necessarily, stone cutters. It wasn't really, and that's a skill that really has to be brought down. That's a very specific skill. The temple, you mentioned at the top of that large mound, there's evidence that there was a wooden structure there. When Nephi talks about his temple, and we would assume that the Mulekites probably had that same kind of skill set, that they could work with timber. But yeah, it was a wooden building. They also talk. You can go back and look at what were the Jews building around the time that Nephi left Jerusalem. Well, they had to bring other people in whenever they built the temple or rebuilt the temple. They weren't at that skill set, but even the walls around Jerusalem were pretty much piles of rock. But yeah, you look at the descriptions and in the scriptures of those cities, and we're finding these huge cities in North America, and we'll never know of all of them, because like we said, we've built on top. We've built on top of what used to be there.
Yeah.
Farmers didn't think anything of it, probably because it was everywhere.
Yeah.
Everybody was finding something, so they didn't think anything of it. And you do have the newspaper articles of what farmers found, and you do have the Smithsonian surveys that were done, but who knows how much has been lost.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why you have to lean on those early Smithsonian documents, because that's about as close that we could get. And like you said, yeah, any letters, anything that was found that they could pinpoint where things were. I mean, the one big missing point that we, like, for example, that we will talk about in a future episode will be the menorah mound. That's one that's totally gone, and we kind of have an idea from the history, but we don't know where it is because there's no bumps. There's very little, I mean, Steph and I remember we drove all around that area in Ohio where we think the Menorah Mound is, and just couldn't find anything that really, uh, except for the river. You can see the river that it's on the map, but it's all been plowed down and houses are all over it, and yeah, it's very difficult to find. So St. Louis would be, who knows what St. Louis was
Mm.
2,000 years ago. We have no idea, but it is definitely in a center point of the United States where all the rivers and all that action, seem to be going
Mm.
on. So,
Yeah, like for instance, when the Pilgrims came here, they talk about fortifications and things like that. I grew up in Massachusetts. None of those fortifications are still there. None of those Native American villages are still there. I
yeah,
mean, and that's pretty modern history. So we're talking about things that are thousands of years old. And the realistic approach of, is it all still going to be there? Well, in North America, we are living in the same places. It wasn't covered by a forest that ate those cities up. Um, our population grew and expanded and grew and expanded, and now that land has been taken up by another people.
yeah.
So
Cahokia easily could have been. I mean, the honest truth is, Cahokia is one of the lucky ones that
yeah,
actually got preserved and got the funding and got the attention to the point to where, okay, that's great. But it's honestly, it's one of the lucky ones is really
yeah.
what it is, because who knows if there's not another Cahokia sized place somewhere else, but we just will never know because it's long since been plowed over. And that's
What does the museum there have? Does it have artifacts that people can kind of go and look at, or does it
yeah,
have
no,
that
that's a
kind
good
of
point. The museum is they've got artifacts that are like what was dug up, some of the things that were dug up in there, and from those artifacts, that's when how they can kind of determine who the people were and what they were doing. um, and they have a nice diorama that you can go in and see what it would have looked like they kind of redecorated, in miniature form, the Monk's Mound and the Plaza and all of the other mounds that are around it. And you can see what life would have been like in Cahokia in the museum. And there's even a film. They have a film that they play there. And then it's kind of cool. You can tell they put some money into it. They have a film in a little theater. And then when the film is over, the screen rolls up, and then you see uh, the you see kind of in the background, you see it's like a glass, and you can see this what life was like in 3D. And so they have all of the like statues of what the people would have looked like, and of course they're half naked. So I mean they're no, they're hardly dressed, and because that's how everybody was back then, and so they just didn't dress. And that actually takes me to the whole nature of the Nephites. I mean, it snows there. I mean, it definitely snows, and they had their own winters, and people who would complain about Book of Mormon evidence being, well, the Lamanites went around with no clothes on, running around with weapons and all kinds of stuff. So how could it be in North America? Well, go to, Cahokia, and you'll see guys running around with no shirts on, uh, living their life here there in Cahokia. So obviously there was a time to put your clothes on and there was a time to take them off. And I don't know. I just don't know. I'm just the skeptic that goes into that kind of thing. But yeah, the visitor center is great. It's actually one of the best ones, I think, as far as ancient American stuff.
do
There's others that would go into,
do
but
they have any metal artifacts? Do they have any of the
yes,
copper
they
you
have
mentioned?
copper. Yeah, they have the copper artifacts. The copper and mica were probably the primary things that they found buried, was there, and
At
was
at one of those sites, and I haven't been to very many. I've stuck to kind of the east. They have they have a wall that they've rebuilt. Is that at Cahokia or is that another site?
Yeah, that is Cahokia.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it shows you the wall, and what's interesting to me is it seems like that's very much something that was described out of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
The structure of the wall. It seemed, that it's almost like someone was reading the book when they rebuilt the wall, even though I'm sure they weren't members of the church.
Yeah, like I said, you can't help but to think Zarahemla, or at least one of the big cities, maybe even the city of Nephi, who knows? But
Yeah,
it's I'm not going to say it is. I'm just going to say that I think it's a candidate worth looking for. While the dating, and here's what's interesting: while the dating sets it the activity at 900 to 1200, it does say that the woodland culture did start showing up at 600 BC. So obviously for over 1,000 years, people were coming to the Cahokia area. So there are things found as early as that. But I also, I'm going to get in trouble here, but I also question the dating. And so, because then when you start getting into, like, when we go into Poverty Point, we're going to talk about Poverty Point soon. They're getting into dating of things that are 8,000 and 10,000 BC. And it's like, okay, if they're dating people at 8 to 10,000 BC, is that dating accurate or is that off? Or is that creation time? I mean, what if we're trusting the dating within the walls of, Adam's creation and, just a few hundred years ago, if we're trusting that dating, and if it's those same guys that are saying, oh, but these people were 8,000 years old and 10,000 years ago, is that one false and the other one true? Or is the dating just skiwampus? Or did the flood mess up all the dating? I mean, there's a lot of questions, to be asked about dating.
I'm
these
not.
things.
I don't know much about dating, and I don't really. I mean, I don't know. I try to look and see if it could be within the time period.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I stick, because I think that, like, we tend to just say, well, that's it and that's the final. But we're
Yeah.
finding more and more every day. Technology is getting better and better. We're able to date things maybe better and better. I don't know, or maybe we're getting worse. But, like, we try to find something within the time period that you're looking for. And honestly, if Cahokia might have had Jaredites there as well. We don't know. I mean, like I said, people like to live in the same places. And we see that time and time and time again, that civilizations want to be in the same spot.
Yeah.
Because we find what ancients found attractive, we find attractive as well. That's just kind of, there are not very, I mean, there are civilizations out there where, the whole city's deserted and no one moved back there. But I think in North America, it's such an attractive place with resources and whatnot, that civilization after civilization after civilization are going to live in the same place. And a lot of these, you'll talk to people like Wayne May, and he'll be like, oh yeah, like, after the Hopewell left, another group came in and were living there. And then after they left, another group came in and they all added their flair to it.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, who wouldn't? I mean, who, if you've destroyed a city, who wouldn't go back and look for the remains? And who wouldn't go back and, there'd be those that would probably go and who maybe have a heart. And here I am talking after Moroni, right?
Mm-hmm.
So who's not to say there weren't people that came that maybe had a little bit of a heart and did a little bit of reverence and started burying people? Or who's not to say they just went and look, hey, remember that big city that got destroyed? Hey, let's go hang out there for a while and drink a few or whatever. Who's not to say that they you're right. They probably went right back to it. It's not like Moroni wrote his last epistle and nobody was here ever anywhere and they just roamed the place. There were still people that would come and probably build another city later, but
Hmm.
but build on top of grand old Zarahemla, or build on top of grand old city of Nephi, or whatever they knew as far as their history is concerned that was starting to get watered down. That's that period right after 421. I'm sure there was that period of what was life like? What was going on?
Hmm.
Was there a remembrance of any of these things, or did they just forgot and picked up their toys and went home? What
Yeah.
what went on? We just don't know, and we probably will never know
Yeah.
until
We're
we.
we're we're also finding that, there were different civilizations like the Chinese, and there were civilizations, in Indonesia and India that were taking ships, going around the world,
Yeah,
spreading
that's right.
influence. We have cultures that were in Central and South America that were also coming up north. It's not like the de Janeiro was like, hey, we're not going to go past that, but they were coming up north, kind of bringing their culture with them. And you can see that with the DNA. You can see that with the DNA mix
Yeah,
of the modern North American Indian. You know, their DNA is kind of all over the place because they are a mix of different culture that showed up here um in North America. So yeah, I mean,
yeah.
it's
I
just
think
like I think an ancient North America is very much like a North America today, where we are a mix of of that DNA. So
yeah, we definitely are a mix, and we kind of live where we want, and that's I think that was still relevant. But like then, people also like to gather where there was activity, and they like to go somewhere and be there and just uh, you know either donate to the land or suck off the land, I guess you could say, in a rude kind of way. But definitely, Cahokia is definitely a great place to go and to figure and to kind of think who really were these people here. And like I said, I have a little bit of an argument as to how early Cahokia really is, if there is any relevance to the Book of Mormon. We don't know, but I think it'd be fun to explore. And so,
in your like of your top 10 places of places that you've been that show ancient North America, is Cahokia in that list?
I think Cahokia would be number one. I think
Number
it's
one.
pretty high. Yeah.
Okay.
It's there's other cool places, but Cahokia, as far as a real connection to who was here long before Columbus, that's one of the best preserved and best informational places that you could ever go visit. And
Okay.
so, yeah, definitely, get the family in the van and head on over to Cahokia, and I think you would really get a thrill out of it. And
And those that are making their trip to Nauvoo,
yep,
or making a trip, east to see some of the church sites, you can very easily add on some of these places.
I agree with you. No, that's a very good point. And actually in 2018, that's kind of what we did do is we got in a car and we took our two youngest kids with us. We took them to Nauvoo. We visited a few church history sites along the way, along the that whole drive through Nebraska, because there are some cool sites there of church history. Got to Nauvoo, and then we went right to Cahokia, and that was a cool place to visit. And another topic we'll have in the future will be Zelf's Mound, which is between Cahokia and Nauvoo. You got to make a stop to Zelf's Mound. It will be the least marked location and the least preserved place that's really interesting. So if you know what tumbleweed to turn by and what brush to stop at, you'll know how to get to Zelf's Mound, which we'll go into in another discussion. But Cahokia
Yeah,
is definitely a big stop. So
Zelf's Mound almost warrants a whole episode, and that's one of those things that's interesting within the church because it's almost something that's laughed about, but it's actually a very important, key and
yeah,
important to church history. So yeah.
it definitely is. So well, I think there's probably a lot more I could go into on Cahokia, but I think it's very important for each of you to do your own research. You can start with Wikipedia. You can find this video if you want to. I'm assuming it might be on YouTube by now somewhere, but it's also there's a lot of Cahokia. Like I said, it's a real center place when anybody gets into any discussion about ancient America. Cahokia is usually one of the first places. But what's ironic is how many Americans have never even heard of Cahokia. And so I think it's important for us to help educate people about Cahokia and kind of the thrill that it got preserved. It's one of the few that has been preserved, and there's a few others which we're going to go into in future episodes. But definitely visit Cahokia. Definitely look for the video. It's a good resource, and it also is a good thing to use when you're trying to pinpoint your own research on ancient America and the Book of Mormon. And so, anyway, well, that's what I've got today. I think we'll just end for this episode. Remember to subscribe to this channel because we're hoping to get more podcasts going. You can find us on YouTube. We plan on being on all the other channels. So you're probably listening to us on Spreaker or iHeart Radio, and so we're excited that you join us, and we hope that you'll continue the research. Also, give us a comment. Leave us a comment about things. Be kind, be nice, obviously, because this is a heated discussion, but it's our goal to kind of bring down the fire and to just pull out the raw embers of truth. Do you like that little likeness I just created there, Mark? That was really good. It came out of me at the last minute, just like that.
I like that as much as I like your logo. They're both really good.
Anyway, you guys are awesome. So we'll see you again next time on Hidden in the Heartland podcast.